to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation. This hearing will begin by a presentation by the Minister, followed by any questions from members. Following that, we will open up to the public if they have any questions, comments, or would like to make a presentation themselves. Can I have someone adopt the agenda? Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Any objections? Agenda moved. Declarations of conflict of interest on an as and when basis, please. With that, I will ask members to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Thank you. Katrina Knockleby, MLA for Great Slave.
Kevin O'Reilly, FrameLink.
And to those appearing online.
Ron Bonadrus, MLA Decho, Massey.
Thank you. Is there any other members online? Nope, that is our quorum today. We are also joined by committee researcher Joe Levine and committee clerks Amy Lizotte and Katie Weaver. Thank you everyone for attending today, and with that, Minister, I will turn it over to you to introduce the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss Bill 84, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Act, or the BDIC Act. Joining me today is Joyce Taylor, Chief Executive Officer with the BDIC. The BDIC Act and regulations have not been comprehensively updated since being passed in 2005, despite there being significant market changes over the years. The purpose of Bill 84 is to modernize and amend the BDIC Act to enhance clarity and transparency and provide the organization with the authority and ability to effectively deliver value-added supports to entrepreneurs and businesses. The amendments consist of administrative and technical changes to increase clarity and public accountability, and amendments that offer flexibility to better support entrepreneurs and businesses. The new act uses plain language where possible, and there are 9 amendments being brought forward in the bill that have been informed by engagement with stakeholders and the BDIC board over the last 18 months. Mr. Chair, these amendments will help the organization better address the needs of Northwest Territories businesses and entrepreneurs and create opportunities to generate positive business and economic development across the Northwest Territories. That concludes my opening remarks for the public hearing of Bill 84, and I would be happy to answer any questions that committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Are there any questions, comments from committee? Emily O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess I just want to get a better understanding of why the bill is before us and who led the changes. Because I believe in the independence of BDIC. And so I just would like to know who actually drafted the changes. Is this an ITI-led initiative, or where is it coming from? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Emily O'Reilly. Minister Wozniak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I share that view. This is not an ITI-led initiative. This has been driven by BDIC. And with that, I actually suggest that I have Ms. Taylor speak to that, please.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a BDIC-led initiative, and the changes were recommended in our 2019 review, our program review. The strategic plan was drafted for 21 to 24 by the board, and it instructed us to proceed with updating our legislation that had not been comprehensively updated since 2005. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Emily O'Reilly, follow.
Yeah, thanks for that. Was the board actually provided a copy of the draft bill and an opportunity with reasonable amount of time to respond? And what was the response? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister Wozniak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the CEO is the main liaison to the board, so I'll suggest this go to Ms. Taylor.
Ms. Taylor.
Mr. Chair, the BDIC board was actively engaged right from the onset. The previous board members, when they drafted the 2021 to 2024, set out guidelines and potential discussion areas that they wanted us to address. That was followed up with the current board who reviewed the previous information. They were actively engaged during the engagement sessions. We did surveys. We surveyed extensively across the businesses of the Northwest Territories, and we had 78 respondents to surveys. We also had engagements, 11 engagement sessions, of which one of the board members attended and provided comments on behalf of businesses and industries. And we had the board actively participate in summary updates during the 5 ongoing meetings that we held with the current board, where they were provided with information and updates on proposed legislation changes prior to the drafting, during the drafting, and then they also were involved in the final commentary of the drafting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Emily Knockley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just further to some questions around the board. I do note that there isn't a chairperson or a vice chairperson. And when we were provided with the membership of the board, it's very Yellowknife and Fort Smith centric and heavy. It's only Yellowknife and Fort Smith is my understanding. So can the minister or the CEO speak a little bit about how did the lack of diversity on the board really impact any changes made, and how do they feel that small communities and other regions were captured, their thoughts on this? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we did have, a board chair out of Inuvik until fairly recently, and we also did put in place early in my, since I was involved with BDIC, looking at having a better matrix in terms of bringing in more diversity to who's on the board. With the chair having to step back, we do now have a vice chair, but I'll suggest that, again, being the main liaison to the board, I'll turn it over to Joyce to just speak to a little further to the transition between the two boards from prior to now. Thanks.
You, Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is an excellent question, and it is a concern of the BDIC because we potentially want a far-reaching audience in terms of participation from businesses to hear the gap. We did do an extensive review under Minister Wozniak's direction from implementing a skills and knowledge matrix that was directed by an OHE best practices, and that was very successful in 2021. Unfortunately, there were recent resignations in terms of expiries, and the previous minister had put in place that they would only be 1-year term renewals, which was a challenge in the sense of creating and preserving knowledge on the board. So with also an upcoming change in government, Minister Wozniak has provided for a bridging or transition to a new board. However, we have the need to go out broadly and ensure that it's a very robust and open and transparent process to ensure that communities could participate and have the opportunity to actually speak and come forward. So temporarily, I do agree that it was concentrated in Yellowknife, but that is definitely not the intention going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Follow up, Emily Knockleby.
Thank you for that. And I guess just curious to know if there actually was really a supply of people. I mean, I get whenever we talk about board vacancies, sometimes it's a matter of there's nobody applying, or that there is the criteria doesn't meet what the people that are applying has. So I guess I just have some curiosity around that, but don't want to use that as my question. So I will just take it that we're moving forward in a better manner. I guess my next question is around the relationship between ITI and the BDIC, and I know this is a little bit, we're here for an act, but this is when we've got you here, so I want to ask. I know there's overlap at times between the two departments, so I guess can the minister or the CEO speak a little bit about that relationship, and perhaps they could give us a copy of the service agreement that's used with the BDIC and ITI? Maybe that would help us to understand a little bit better where the differences are. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm going to go ahead and sneak in and say that the board matrix that's been developed to actually determine having competencies it's comprehensive. It's looking at having a balance of different, business owners, business persons, accounting backgrounds, maybe having a lawyer, so it really is meant to capture not having a group of people that all frankly would think the same or experience the business community the same way or be from the same region. So, I mean, when we had Inuvik and Akaladik represented, this did have a representation from north and south. So we are looking to get back there, and I think the matrix will guide that work. In terms of the relationship with ITI and BDIC, you know, if you have an opportunity to review, whether it's the What We Heard report in particular, speaking to, which led really to where we're at with this legislation, that actually does speak to exactly this issue of wanting to ensure that there's sufficient strength within BDIC's Act to maintain its independence and to give it adequate authority to undertake the kind of work it wants to. And, you know, and be able to do so without having to rely on the GNWT or ITI for its direction and guidance. That said, there is an important relationship in that BDIC doesn't necessarily have representatives in every small community in particular. And so in terms of delivering services, you know, receiving applications, it is ITI that does do that on their behalf. So, and again, I'll turn it to Joyce if she has anything she wants to add further to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Question. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an excellent question in that ITI is a frontline agent to the BDIC. The BDIC headquarters staff have about 4 full-time employees that support 21 regional positions in the ITI frontline service. And we have a breakdown in terms of how much service is provided based on their reporting to the Office of the Auditor General, and we can provide that if required. In terms of the other part of the relationship, we do have the service agreement as well that guides our relationship with them, as the member mentioned. And lastly, we are funded by the ITI through their contribution agreements, and we report to the minister, who is the same minister as ITI. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments from committee? Malay Bonnet-Rouge?
Merci, Mr. Chair, and merci to the minister and your staff for appearing before us. I had a question in regards to, I don't know if it's ever been asked, but you're looking at changing the name from BDIC to Prosper NWT Act. I'm just wondering why it's required to change the name, Masi.
Thank you. Minister Wasnick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Chair, Ms. Taylor's going to have a lot more to say on this one. I want to speak to this one a bit in that I've certainly heard that raised to me with my colleagues on cabinet as well. And the response I've been, I think, fairly consistent about is this, is that the desire to see a rebranding and the desire to see a new name came from the board. This is not a government sort of initiative, if you will. It was a real sense that BDIC and BDC sound far too similar. BDC, of course, is a federal lending organization and structured quite differently than BDIC. In addition to which, there's a lack of real difference. The fact that it's an acronym even, I gather, it doesn't always translate very well to some Indigenous languages and or it isn't pronounceable by many. So it sort of stumbles off and it becomes too easily wrapped up then with being the ITI office to which people are attending often in small communities rather than knowing that they're going to seek different services. So there was a very strong desire that came. As far as the actual name, the final suggestion of Prosper NWT, again, there too, I know we had an opportunity, I had an opportunity some time ago to be briefed by BDIC about their selections and their options, and have tried very hard to not, frankly, step on those toes too much. This went through the board. The board initiated the process, engaged, a consultant with communications background, and although I know I gave some feedback, I want to be kind of frank about it, that this is another one of those times where I'm not necessarily best placed to know what entrepreneurs, business people in communities or regions are hearing, seeing, and feeling about the BDIC, and so it's really been a BDIC and board-led process with some input from my office, but minimally so. So with that, I'll turn for a further explanation to the CEO, please.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was a concern for the BDIC as well in terms of the undertaking of a rebranding. seemed aspirational. However, in consultation with a consultant that did a full audit of our organization, it was confirmed that there was incredible confusion between various organizations and at times provided reputational damage to us because we were often cited with the performance of other related names, and that was confusing to the public. It also caused a problem for businesses to know where they should actually be going to as a partner with the Northwest Territories development partner. The opportunity for a name change, which is proposed to be Prosper NWT, was selected through the full engagement with various tests. There's a lot of in-depth analysis that goes into the selection of a name. Many, many names were reviewed, and as the minister mentioned, that the translation is important. Our previous acronym had negative connotations that were being remedied through the introduction of a new proposed name. It also speaks more to what the BDIC would like to do and to accomplish into the future, which would bring prosperity into the North through partnering with organizations and businesses in the North. Sometimes if we are looking at venture partners, that can also be, the previous name could be problematic in that sometimes when you're looking at its old sort of emphasis as a lender of last resort with the reputation, it could cause true investors to shy away because there were legacy issues with some of the venture investments. So these are all some of the considerations, as well as the proposed name is an ownable name. It's short, it's memorable. We could purchase and secure the various social media connections so that we could broadly engage with our various stakeholders into the future, and we could mitigate some of the reputational challenges that we had in the past. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Emily Bonnerouge?
Mostly, Mr. Chair, and mostly for the long answers. I don't know. If I said that to somebody else, they'd probably laugh at me. But anyways, I wish we would have just kept the name and had everybody else change their acronyms. But anyways, I think we can live with change, I guess. I'm wondering about the board makeup. I'm not too in tune with what's happening here. I don't think the public is too in tune with what's happening with the new Prosper NWT stuff there, or the BDIC. I'm wondering if you could just probably explain the board, how many members, what regions, if there's a chairman and a deputy chair, and what are their functions. Let's see.
Merci. Minister Waslick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll turn that to the CEO, please.
Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We currently have 2 vacancies. We have a mandate to have between a minimum of 5 board members and a maximum of 10. We currently have quorum with the existing members. We have a diverse group of board of directors in that we currently have 3 women, 3 men, 2 Indigenous, and 4 non-Indigenous. There are 4 residents of Yellowknife and 2 of Fort Smith. And there are 2 members who are visible minorities and 2 members with legal education experience and background and 1 professional accountant. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to sneak a question in. Can the minister just, I guess I'm somewhat supportive of the rebranding in that I find the space very confusing. First, there's the Business Development Corporation, and then I believe we fund 5 or 6 other development corporations through Community Futures. And then each Indigenous government owns a development corporation, which is a seemingly completely different thing. But I think if you're a business person, it's very confusing where to go and what all of those organizations do. And in some cases, they're directly competing with each other, either as lenders or grants or business support. I'm just wondering if, I get BD Prosper is now one part of that, but if there's a larger conversation about how we review the multiple kind of groups operating and make sure there's not too much overlap. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I agree with you. Now, it's not perhaps quite as dire as it might seem. The community futures organizations are they're generally the micro lenders. Then you would move up. Well, first you'd start with your ITI programs, which tends to be your seed programming, which folks I think are generally familiar with. It's often where you get your money to do a business plan, to get started. You can go into the community futures, which tends to be micro lending. BDIC is really a next step up. There are maximum amounts of lending that's allowed through community futures, which don't apply to BDIC. So it really does tend to, once someone goes in to look at an EDO or at a regional office to ask, I would expect that the regional officer is able to explain, start here, get your business plan, come here if you need a micro loan, or go to BDIC when you're ready, when you have a business plan and when you're ready to move forward. As for Indigenous development corporations and, for example, MDDF, the work that they do, I know that they do work with BDIC. Folks do talk one to the other, so they're hoping to not be at odds with one another and to be complementary. And there's other organizations, I won't start naming names, but that are looking to do business development, business growth, entrepreneurship. So I think the space that we'd like to start to see filled is more understanding what some of the gaps still may be, and ensuring that to the extent that there are some BDICs looking to have better tools to help fill them, which some of the proposals in the legislation, we're hoping will do that by giving them some flexibility in terms of what they're able to do with the available money, but also some flexibility in terms of what they're able to do, for example, with venture investments, which right now is an underused and frankly almost non-used area by BDIC over the last many years. So again, yes, I think that's an ongoing conversation. I think there's some fixes coming with the rebranding and with the changes proposed in the legislation. And then there's work happening at ITI right now in terms of reviewing community futures. So all of that's coming to I think a happy culmination where we will start to see some proposals to ensure that moves forward in a better path. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. I have another follow-up. So the BDIC, through this act, is asking for a little bit more permission to go into venture capital, and I agree with that, but there's also, to kind of increase its lending capacity. And I know in the past we've made some questionable loans, perhaps, being a lender of last resort, the odd bankruptcy is just inevitable, but I'm just curious if anything's changing to kind of manage that risk. Here we're being asked to increase the amount of money BDIC can lend, and there's probably been some questionable decisions made in the past. I'll start with you, Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I do think the CEO is well placed to speak to exactly that understanding of risk analysis. The changes being proposed here aren't meant to allow BDIC to make bad investments. It's meant to allow for BDIC to make more strategic investments and to give them more authority to do so. And part of that means ensuring that making sure that we are clarifying the lines between ministerial authority and government authority and BDIC. Having that independence there, I think, probably is a positive thing in terms of ensuring that they're making good investments. While not removing the fact that they remain, under the review, there has to still be reporting in through the government's processes. So that it still allows for that kind of oversight, and allowing them. I guess that's right. One other thing I don't want to forget before I turn over to our CEO is the clarification around conflicts of interest. Not wanting to make it so restrictive that in a small jurisdiction, particularly small communities, that people aren't able to work for the BDIC and then also have family members start small businesses. But, by relying or proposed to be relying on CRA, this is actually a set way by way of saying, making sure that when you're asking someone for a loan, is it clear who the decision makers are and is it clear whether or not there's any conflicts? I'm not suggesting that that's been the source of bad decisions in the past, but putting people into a mindset that is more business oriented around when and how to make an investment will hopefully start to create that culture that is a more positive business culture as opposed to being a lender of last resort, which really isn't the ideal. but I've probably missed a few things that our CEO may want to speak to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The BDIC does concur with the assessment that in the past there have been questionable investments, and I think one of the issues that we've faced is that we have a mandate to support businesses, to create businesses, to diversify the economy through the creation and development of business opportunities. I think the one challenge has been decisions have sometimes been made on a business by business decision-making process, as opposed to looking at the sustainability of the organization and the portfolio as a whole. Having been involved in true venture capitalism in the past from a fund perspective, there is a need to look at investment strategy, because you have to determine your investment strategy by industry and by region, and to set those and align those with the mandate of the government of the Northwest Territories and the NWT Assembly and what they'll set. Because there are opportunities and there are risks to any investment. And you need to ensure that the mandate is being met, while at the same time you're ensuring that there is the capacity, the expertise, and the resources that are available to actually get into a particular region and or investment sector, an industry sector. So the proposed approach into the future in order to mitigate risk, which has been aptly identified here as well as by the board. The BDIC board has been investing in more professional development and governance training. We had full training of the entire board in their orientation. One of the board members specifically was delegated to take Crown Corporation training in the area of governance, and especially with the emerging environment, social, and governance model for the ESG impact investing, because that is an evolving both financial disclosure as well as a very important part of investing in the North, given the economy and the diversity that we have in the North. So based on that, there's the investment strategy, then you have to get into the risk. So the BDIC, under the board's guidance, have been reviewing and assessing a broad spectrum of industry standard assessment tools in order to do data analytics. And it will facilitate us to better manage both by detecting data risk and then to do predictive analysis so that we can compare historical data to future opportunity to know where the board should consider possibly staying out of or possibly investing in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Next on the list, I have Emily O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm a bit skeptical of the name change as well, probably more than a bit. This isn't the first example of doublespeak I think I've seen from our government. We went from a knowledge economy to an innovation action plan, which I don't think is a proper description of what's there, but in going to Prosper NWT, I'm just not sure it actually describes the programs and services that you folks actually do. So you mentioned that there's a consultant's report. Is that public? And if it's, even if it's not public, I'd like to get, I think committee should get a copy of that report. I'd encourage you to also make it public though as well. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, Mr. Chair, I'm certainly not an expert in rebranding. I'm not an expert in public branding, anything of the sort. So the board undertook that process, to hire an expert in the area, and that they did produce a report at the end of the day. I'm certainly happy to share it with committee, but I'd like to go back to the board to confirm their comfort level in having it go public. So, I mean, if the board's fine with it, then it's fine with me. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily O'Reilly?
Yeah, I think it would, I might be convinced, but I would like to see the report, please. There's there's some changes in the legislation around, the current legislation, as I understand it, there's a 5-year review that's mandated, and I think that's a good thing. And but in the new legislation, that's not there, but it's, the work is still going to be done, because I guess it's going to be done now under the Financial Administration Act. But there's a timing issue because the review was done in 2019 and it's not clear when the clock would start ticking again. There's no transitional provision in the legislation that says the next review shall commence on this date. Committee pointed this out and we didn't get a solution from you folks. So do you want us to draft a transitional provision to correct this or what? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if it was to come under the FAA or the Financial Administration Act, we anticipate that that date would then have it due by March 31st of 2027, meaning it would have to be undertaken starting most likely in 2026, if not possibly even sooner. If we're about to go through a transitional period and if we're about to have a new act and obviously have some new board members coming in, sort of over 23, 24, I don't know that a couple of years to have them get their legs under them with a new act and possibly some branding would be a terrible delay. So our proposal is to stick with FAA, which my understanding based on how that what that due date is again the 2027 due date. So I appreciate the need for some continual review. I hope people have heard me talk about evaluations and various government evaluation processes enough. So I don't disagree. But just suggesting that we'd prefer to stick with the sort of starting at 2026 rather than advancing that by a year or two. I don't know that there's enough to be gained in terms of the added cost. But again, happy to receive committee's feedback on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Emily Knuckleby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also going to throw my lack of support for the new name into this conversation. I would prefer to see if there's an issue with branding around the BDIC that we work on fixing the reputation of the BDIC versus just calling it something different and kind of losing all of that history. But yeah, I will not dwell on that too much longer. My next question is around the Venture Investment Program and its revamping. I'm not going to profess to be an expert on what that program is doing, but it is my understanding it hasn't really been taken. That hasn't really been had much uptake or use. Can the minister or the CEO confirm with me whether or not that now will be opened up to non-Northwest Territories-based businesses? And if so, how is it then that we would prioritize our own businesses over those from the south? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you. The idea of ensuring that BDIC is meant to benefit Northwest Territories businesses is one that we've certainly talked quite a bit about to ensure, and the board obviously is very alive to that, being Northwest Territories business persons themselves, but and so wanting to ensure that whatever changes were made, we're able to capitalize on the benefits of having investments from potential southern investors who have certainly often deeper or at least different pockets than those exclusively in the north, but for the benefit of Northwest Territories businesses. That's the short answer, Mr. Chair, but I'm not sure. I mean, if we want more detail, I also would suggest that I could turn it to the CEO. Thank you.
Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intention is not to actively invest with southern companies. One of the shortfalls that we had under the previous legislation was that it did not also incorporate Canadian incorporated companies, even northern companies, so that it was actually a legal flaw because it prevented us, because it looked at strictly NWT companies, so that will be rectified by the change in legislation proposed. Secondly, it's similar to how development corporations will sometimes partner in a joint venture with a southern partner in order to bring much needed expertise and dollars and capital on a temporary basis. It's not to be investing on a long term, but partnering with people that could bring expertise in industries that we may not have in the north, and or capacity that is strictly possessed by people outside of the NWT that might not otherwise relocate here. It would potentially open the opportunities for northern businesses to learn, to have access to capital that they wouldn't otherwise have, to have mentoring and or guidance by people that are already successful in the space. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Any follow-up, Emily Knockleby?
Thank you for that. And yeah, and I mean, I do support, it is a balance, right? I do definitely support us having Southern investment, and we always know that when people come here for work, they often like it and may want to stay and establish their own branches of their business in the territory itself. So I do appreciate that we do want to see that type of investment. I guess my next question is, when I was the minister responsible for BDIC, I did hear a lot about sort of not only the financial supports for business, but also the business supports in themselves. So the programs to help people with accounting, et cetera, marketing, all of that. So could the minister maybe, or the CEO, speak a bit about what are the types of non-financial supports that we're going to be seeing established coming forward? You know, things to around improving competition in the business sector. I know a big issue has always been around market, what's the word now? The market competition, that if, a business is opening up, that there's another business already providing that. Sometimes that doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to, in that there is enough work for everybody and a second business would be welcome. So maybe the minister or the CEO could speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was quickly trying to find it. I'm sure the CEO will know it, but part of the changes that we're also proposing is to ensure that there's more clarity about exactly the kinds of work that the BDIC can now undertake, and to give them a bit of more latitude, perhaps I'll put it that way, to deliver those types of business programs. But given that I'm not finding the section right now, let me turn it over to the CEO.
Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, it's another excellent question. We did, during the engagement sessions, hear extensively from the businesses and stakeholders to the significant gaps that are in the marketplace for the business services. The MLA committee member mentioned that there are times where competition actually prevents even an aspiring business entrepreneur from getting funding through some of the other sources, because some of the contributions are restricted where there already exists a business in the space. The BDIC is proposing a very limited reorganization. We have the professional expertise within our organization to support even things like business plan help, so that an entrepreneur is not delayed in advancing an idea where specifically there might be a restriction on obtaining contribution funding because there's already competition. However, we have expertise to help them walk through the process and mentor them through certain things. In the area of financial accounting and bookkeeping, where again, the firms themselves are experienced, and when I say the firms, I'm speaking about the public accounting firms providing accounting, bookkeeping, and other services to businesses. They themselves are resource stretched due to the inability sometimes to attract talent. When the BDIC already currently has talent, we are looking at doing what firms do, where they partition the assistance and helping support business owners from the actual loan or venture assessment. So you do a firewall between them so that we can help businesses advance and look at the service needs without compromising an assessment or a proposed decision on advancing them funding in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, members. We're at 45 minutes, so I'll open it up to the last set of questions. And Emily Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have one question, maybe. So there's been lots of discussion around business supports, programs and services available to businesses, but we haven't really talked about another side of BDIC, and that's its subsidiaries. Things like the craft shops in Uluhaktuk and in Fort Liard, the Denny Fur Clouds in Fort Providence, the very successful Fort McPherson Tent and Canvas shop in Fort McPherson. These are really important initiatives in terms of economic diversification and creating jobs in small communities. And quite frankly, I don't even care if they make money. They do good things in small communities. It'd be great if they do make money, but it's also about some elements of cost avoidance. But what If anything, are these changes going to do to enable BDIC to do more of this work in the future? Thanks.
Thank you. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, so the bill doesn't really amend the provisions that respect to the subsidiaries, but again, it's trying to ensure that we're giving BDIC the ability to make decisions with a little more latitude by the board. The board being regionally based, again, I think recognizes exactly as the member is saying the benefits of having business opportunities in small communities, even when they're not money-making ventures, which generally these ones are generally not. But, in trying to, but again, following up a little bit on Joyce's last response around finding ways to partner, finding ways to bring in more investment, there may be opportunities to bring in investment, to bring in expertise that could actually turn some of these businesses into more money-making ventures. Uhaktak Arts and Crafts being a good example that wound up being shut down for longer than it maybe could have been if it had somebody in there, able to help get them online in a way that they weren't, get their products out, to have awareness, marketing, et cetera, which really isn't necessarily expertise that resides within BDIC, and nor should it necessarily. That's just one example of that, but, yeah, again, I want to make sure this is really not sort of one that's driven ministerially, so I'll turn it to the CEO as well, too, if I could, please.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is an excellent comment, and I do confirm that even in the last fiscal year, in 2022-23, the subsidiary programs help support 9.8 community jobs, full-time equivalent jobs, and as well 63 arts and craft producers. So that does bring revenue and income into the communities. The BDIC has intensified their actual support in direct access to marketing of arts and crafts. We have just introduced, effective April 1st, a program, ADAPT, to accelerate digital adoption so that the individual arts and crafts producers can also market directly to consumers, which will help them. It will fund access for websites, access to social media, access to online e-commerce, actual payment, so that they can have potential exposure to even a larger marketplace than our existing stores, potentially capitalize on a global market, even an NWT-wide market, as opposed to just a targeted community market. So that is one of the compensating things that we've tried to introduce to continue to support those people that were otherwise being supported through our subsidiary program. As far as the future plans for the subsidiaries, we have been actively working with our subsidiaries. We had engagement, and we also went out with an expression of interest, which we recently closed, related to the Dene for Clouds, in order to continue to advance what has always been a very successful product, and has historically brought much recognition to the community and the art and crafters who produce that high quality fur product. We are partnering with a successful northerner who already is established in the fur marketplace, which is a very specific marketplace where messaging and communication to market is very important to overcome any barriers with resistance to fur products. And we will continue to work with our other subsidiaries so that we will partner. Again, we're looking to partner with northerners who can work together with the BDIC rather than just remove that program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taylor and Minister Wozniak. I'm going to call questions now. We will reschedule you for the clause by clause, so we will have a second opportunity for committee once we have kind of put our thoughts together, and we will provide you with written feedback on the bill. Thank you very much for attending today. I will now open the floor up. If there is anyone in the room or online or anywhere in the world who wishes to present to committee as a witness, you are more than welcome to do so. Please. I'll take about a 20-second break here while we shuffle, and if you could just come up to the witness chair at the table. Yep. All right, we will now proceed with our next witness. I'll turn it over to you. If you could just introduce yourself for your record and any questions, comments, please begin.
Thank you. I am a client of BDIC. We've been a client for many years, and we found BDIC a very helpful organization and to work with. The only thing that, as being a client, I like to bring in some thoughts of it. The many clients like ourselves, to be able to get finance of a large amount, the banks, because some in the industry, like I'm in the manufacturing business, they're not very friendly to lending money or to take a risk in that. And BDIC did take that risk on us and work with us for years. And we are where we are because of BDIC. But on that, I feel that there could be some improvements, probably because of policies. It limits the BDIC to do more than they can do. One of them is take preferred shares in a company for a period of time, to release some of the burden of the mortgage and go into that to make it more viable. To start manufacturing in the Northwest Territories is very frustrating, not just because of the financing, but because of the policies and the way the government is doing procurement. There's no way to really grow manufacturing in the NWT when we're talking about prosper NWT, which is, I like the word and that's why I'm here, is that for business to grow in manufacturing, we need a more longer term commitments from the procurement aspect of it. And BDIC many times is tied with their hands. And when you talk about Futures North and working in BDIC and ITI and all that, I like the comment that Brian, you brought into, there's too many things competing for the same thing. I feel that BDIC could play an excellent role in the finance aspect of it in the NWT, and hopefully they can do better rates on the interest rates that what they are charging over that. And it could be an excellent engine for growth in the North, in diversification of the Northwest Territories. So my recommendation to me would be that instead of having to go to ITI for an application and then wait there and spend money, so we went through that, and then goes to BDIC and wait for months to get an answer into that. If we turn BDIC as a lender and are giving them more resources and responsibilities into it, into Prosper North, and not to have to go that, because even if you have a loan with BDIC and you want to go to Future North, you still need to have a letter of approval from BDIC so they can lend you interim money for projects and stuff like that. So I think that BDIC could do an excellent job on that. The other thing is that working with a bank or working with or as a lender is like a partnership. It's like a marriage of commitments for progress. Is that BDIC should be able to provide business like ours an ongoing advice and sharing and knowledge, not just lending the money and making the payments, but to grow and to develop the industry in the North. And at the same time, for them to question the government, where they are purchasing the products, why do they purchase in the way they are doing, and why we cannot make it in the NWT. And that will give more security to BDIC as well, because they know that the business that they're involved with and they're lending to, they have a source of income, and at the same time hiring, training, and providing social economic impact in the NWT. So that's my recommendations, in my opinion, to you there. Another thing that we are facing right now is a huge shortage of skilled workers. And not just in here, but it's across Canada, but especially in the Northwest Territories. Right now, we are not taking projects, but because we don't have people to work. We have the infrastructure, we have the knowledge, we have the equipment, and we don't have human resources. So there is another part where BDIC could work with the government to really start implementing fruitful programs in manufacturing, into the skill development, into that, as they invest us into it. So there is a lot of work that could be done, in my opinion, for a good future, and having people like yourselves on the board to challenge proposals, to come up with good solutions, and to represent the people. So this is my thoughts. I'm talking from my experience, what it would help us as a business to continue manufacturing and to get back into it post-pandemic. And that is not very simple. I don't think that immigration is very important, and to attract people to the North is very important. But it's more important, in my opinion, and in what I believe, not my opinion, what I believe, is that we train and hire our youth instead of being homeless, going to suicidal stages because they don't know where to go to. The government talking about spending billions of dollars. They're talking millions, but actually need billions in housing, and we keep importing into it, instead of focusing and supporting BDIC and their clients to made in the North, to develop in the North, to hire North, to train North, and to support North. So please, see what you can do into that as MLAs, as members of this committee, and in all that, because the North has future. I came over here, and I'm very happy I'm in the Northwest Territories. I'm very happy I've done a lot of things in the Northwest Territories. I've done things here that I never could do anywhere else but in the Northwest Territories. So I thank you for your time and for listening to my thoughts.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Can I just get you to introduce yourself, your name, and your business?
My name is Manuel George. I'm the owner and founder of Energy Wall and Building Products, which is a building system recognized across Canada with an evaluation that has a lot of potential, and that some people in the government, they don't really understand what they have in their doorsteps. They rather go south.
Thank you, Mr. George. I know your business well. Would you mind hanging around if there's any questions from committee members? Are there any questions from MLA Knuckleby?
not so much a question, but just a thank you for coming and sort of reinforcing some of what I already know and have heard. I find it really disheartening that, we don't use our own procurement system and methods to ensure that we are propping up and supporting our northern businesses. And this is an area where the silos, I think, within the government really shows because, for example, I'm aware of at times where the RFP will be very specific about a certain item that can be used, therefore they scope out northern manufacturers, and the example I can think of is tanks, when there really isn't a need to have the tanks specified like that in the RFP, but the government will go ahead and do so, and then as a result, our northern business can't make that tank. So I just want to say that I think this is still quite a large problem. It was one that I know came up right at the beginning of this assembly and then quickly just disappeared through the whole COVID fiasco. And I know we are definitely looking at our procurement review and such, and I hope the minister's staff are all listening offline to the things that you've said. But yeah, I don't see why we're not using our procurement to support our northern manufacturers. And I guess my question to you would be, one of the issues I heard from the agriculture sector around the success of their businesses was just came back solely to like power and energy and fuel. Is that something that you think is also just a really large contributor to prohibiting manufacturers from getting going? Is that an area that we also need to be really looking at?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. George.
Yeah, sorry, not in my field, no.
Any other questions from committee? All right. Thank you very much for presenting today, Mr. George. I'll now open the floor to any further witnesses for any questions, comments, or presentations. Simply stand up. Yeah. Please come forward and introduce yourself. Thank you very much. If you could just introduce yourself for the record and begin with any presentation comments you have.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Siath Sock. I am owner of Aurora Technical Services. We provide electrical and instrumentation services throughout the NWT. Now, I just wanted to share an experience with BDIC in terms of a positive. It was a big positive for us in terms of the services that they are, I believe, requesting to have added. We were approached by a Southern instrumentation company to kind of sort of partner with us, and we're quite naive and new to this business, but we had spoken to several staff members at BDIC who were able to consult with us on the legal ramifications of the proposal that was sent to us by this company. And, prior to us having to spend thousands on lawyers to review these things, I feel that it was an incredibly beneficial service that they were able to provide us. And I would really like to see that move forward as a service from BDIC itself. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that. Are you happy to take a question or two? Emily Knockley?
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I mean, we often get really hung up on everything the government is not doing right, so it is nice to hear when something is successful. Did you feel, though, that was kind of a one-off and they were helping you, or was it given, or did you have the impression that this was something the BDIC does fairly regularly? I guess I'm trying to ascertain if this is actually a service they offer, or you just happened to luck out and get somebody that wanted to help you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I don't feel it was a one-off. I do feel the level of expertise that was in that building, that we're able to speak in terms of accounting services and legal services and things like that. They knew where to point us in the right direction. So I feel like as a newer business owner, that's incredibly important to guide us in the right direction. So I don't feel it was a one-off because they're obviously experts in their fields, and it was quite it was quite apparent there. So I thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from committee? Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it. Once again, open the floor, whether there are any further witnesses who have any comments, questions for us? Seeing none, I will conclude this public hearing today on Bill 84, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation Act. We are always accepting submissions on this bill, particularly till May 19th. You can email those submissions to committees@ntassembly.ca. Following this meeting and receiving all of those submissions, committee will write a report and make a number of recommendations on the bill. Then we will have a clause by clause with the minister where any proposed amendments are put forward, and then the bill will go through committee of the whole and third reading. So those are the steps from here. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. Motion to adjourn.